Well, hello, everybody. It's David Leese here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. A warm welcome to everybody. We're getting lots of comments already from the audience, and we're delighted that you could join us on what is today again? May the 29th, 2025, the year of our Lord. And yes, good afternoon, Sheridan Forbes, and thank you for encouraging people to like the program. We so much appreciate your comments. Across Leaders, we get thousands of comments now every month on this program. It's really quite remarkable, and we do appreciate it. And it's interesting. Sheridan says, hit the like button, folks, for more great content and moments. It doesn't cost you anything but a click to show your support. So well said. And no, we don't know each other. So thank you very much for that kind comment. And a warm welcome to everybody. We have some very important issues to talk about today. We're going to talk not only about some of the news headlines, and hello to you, Robert, from Mississauga. I know that you've made many interesting, thoughtful comments, and among so many others. So it's terrific to see you today. We're going to talk about some of the brief news headlines as people come onto the program. But we're going to turn to what we would call at Frontier a foundational policy file about housing, affordability. And I think you'll find this conversation very interesting because it's having an extraordinary impact on people. And we know this anecdotally, and we're going to show you the stats. So we've got some incredible guests that are going to be joining us in a moment. And good afternoon. Is it Salty? I was almost going to call the name Sally, but no, it's Salty Berry. Good afternoon, and always up for a great conversation. So thank you so much. We have a lot of interesting things going on. You may have heard about the possibility of a Canada Post strike. To be honest, I'm not sure if I totally understand the situations and machinations, but I do know that Blacklock's reporter reported a statement from the CEO of Canada Post that he uses the phrase on the brink. This is the CEO, Doug Ettinger, who said yesterday in a written report to the Federal House of Parliament that the post office reported a pre-tax loss of some $841 million last year. And so this is a very serious situation. What should we do with Canada Post? Surely we should look at a variety of options. It doesn't seem to be working, the status quo. So let us carry on. We know that also in other important news, there is an emerging state of emergency in some parts of the province of Manitoba. And certainly we have everyone in our thoughts and prayers. Here's a picture from Flin Flon. So we'll see how that dynamic situation emerges. It's obviously important to have good information. Forest fires do happen in this country, and this is no exception. What I found very interesting, and Madam Producer pointed this out, is a very recent comment that I thought that was very interesting from the Premier of Manitoba, who, there's a lot of information going around in these kinds of crisis situations and the importance of accurate reporting. And here's a comment from Premier Wab Canoe.
Site are presumably starting a fire on their site.
What proof do you have that Alamos is connected to the start of the fire?
Yeah, but all the residents say it started at the mine site.
So what proof do you have?
I guess we're waiting on the investigation still, but could you repeat what you just said to my colleagues in English about your message to Lynn residents?
I used to be a daily news reporter, so I say this with the utmost of understanding for the pressures that everybody in this room deals with, but I really do think that responsible reporting is very important right now. Journalistic Standards and Practices book, and just making sure that you're not reporting hearsay and that stuff is double sourced before it's getting shared with the public, I think is very, very important. Not to say that that's a specific commentary on this, but just across the board. We've got a very specific message out here today. Flin Flon, a large community in the north, is on the verge of evacuation, and we're asking for people to listen to the message. We're asking for people to get ready, and we're asking Manitobans in other parts of the province to open your doors if the emergency officials come calling.
All right, so there you have it. It's a news conference where Premier Wab Canoe, I think, as I gather, is speaking about some information that a fire started from a nearby mine that's restarting. a gold mine specifically. So just cautioning everyone to be clear on facts and not to report hearsay. So well done. I think that's wise. I mean, this is part of the reason why we need good information in our country in order to be able to understand what's going on. It's interesting. Robert Kerr says that we should just privatize Canada Post and move on. Well, that's a very interesting option that probably is time to consider. Time to get rid of Canada Post, says Prairie. So there you have it. Lots of comments and discussion, and that's the point of this program: is to talk about evidence, to talk about the policy issues that are at stake here. And on other headlines, the Bank of Canada survey has just reported, I believe it was yesterday, that some 22% of Canadian businesses are postponing their investment plans. So that is all related to uncertainty. I think the governor there, you see him walking into literally the offices of the Bank of Canada, is reflecting on how the uncertainty, including tariffs and all the rest, are impacting business. And I'm curious what you're seeing anecdotally. I'm curious about the audience there. On other news, we know that every day there are millions of liters of wastewater that goes into our rivers and lakes and oceans here in Canada. We care all about the environment. I just wanted to underline that this is probably a story that you maybe don't think about very often, understandably, because it's so common. And that is, municipalities are arguably the largest polluters in this country. And Winnipeg story was just reported, as reported in the Winnipeg Free Press, that another pipe failure has been found and that it dumped 228 million liters of raw sewage into the Red River. And that has come about this last year. And the fix for that wastewater pipe, or I believe it's a stormwater pipe, has been deferred till 2026. So look at your municipality. Is it treating its sewage? So, I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, in fact, there's municipalities in this country that don't even treat their sewage. How outrageous is that? So maybe this relates to priorities and what we need to do. There's also a lot of interesting things that are happening. I don't know if you noticed this as we've had King Charles join us. We've got a related story, and that is about Sir John A. Macdonald. He was, as you may recall, the first prime minister of our country. And this is in front of Queen's Park, as it's known, where the Ontario legislature is in Toronto, the capital of Ontario, where it was defaced. And as a result, the authorities boxed Sir John A. up. And I believe it was just announced this past week that it's going to be unboxed. So we're going to set Sir John A. free again to see the sunshine there. And it's kind of really a sad commentary, isn't it, that we have people that have done all kinds of damage to statues, including those across the country. We've even got cases at the Manitoba legislature where they destroyed Queen Victoria's statue. I think the authorities decided not only rebuild, but they also ripped down, I believe it was Queen Elizabeth's statue. And I believe my thesis is that there's been no prosecutions, to my knowledge, of the people, the vandals, doing this. So what's going on here? Is this sending a signal that perhaps not only Sir John A. is being unboxed, but we'll see where this goes? I'm curious what you think. I mean, I think our history is important as a nation, and this sends a bad signal that you can get away with all kinds of vandalism, let alone burning all kinds of places down, including churches, and not be prosecuted. So this is the issue, some of the headlines I wanted to share with you. It's interesting. Freddie says, if current infrastructure isn't checked and repaired, there's bound to be unseen and unexpected problems. Indeed. Exactly. So how are we proactive as well? Lots of comments there. So thank you very much. And another one is, this is a disgrace to Canadian history. Indeed. Well said, Freddie. Okay, so we know that in select markets in this country, there is a housing crisis. And we all know this to be true. As people struggle with housing costs, I believe CMHC released this past week a statistic, as I recall, that 51% of Canadians are struggling to meet their mortgage payments, let alone buy a home. And we know that the next generation, if you're not in the market, is frankly not going to be able to buy a home in major markets. There are exceptions, and we want to talk about this as well. So this year, like in previous years, Frontiers worked with the Demographia Center to release a report around housing affordability. So here to discuss the good, bad, and the ugly regarding housing affordability is none other than Senior Fellow at Frontier, Wendell Cox. And also joining us is the Vice President of Research and Policy at Frontier, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie. So a warm welcome to you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So we're going to dare to go through the situation when it comes to housing. And I want to start off with a note here, and I'm going to have to come back to the throne speech a little bit later if I can, Madam Producer. But I would like to start off with a video that Frontier did to summarize the report, if I could.
Canada's housing affordability crisis is worsening, according to the Frontier Centre's Demographia International Housing Affordability Report. The study uses the median multiple to measure affordability. This is the ratio of median house prices to gross median household income. A ratio of 3 or less is affordable, but Canada's urban average is 5.4. At 11.8, Vancouver is impossibly affordable, and fourth worst in the world. Toronto at 8.4 and Montreal at 5.8 are severely unaffordable. Calgary at 4.8 and Ottawa-Gatineau at 5.0 are seriously unaffordable. Edmonton is moderately unaffordable at 3.7. The report blames skyrocketing prices on land use restrictions such as greenbelts, urban growth boundaries, and densification mandates. Many people are fleeing the biggest cities for smaller ones, such as Kelowna, Chilliwack, London, and Guelph, driving up prices there. Canada needs more housing where people want to live, including detached homes at the urban fringe.
So I encourage everyone to look at that report, and I'm going to turn to you, Wendell Cox. What's the bottom line of this report about housing affordability in major centers in Canada?
Well, excuse me. The first thing I want to do is make sure that your viewers recognize that the problem you have in Canada is really a worldwide problem. It has to do largely with land use regulations that have been adopted by the authorities in various communities that have control over zoning rules and that kind of thing. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that this really has something to do with zoning, local zoning, when no, in fact, it doesn't. The big problem, and we see this in Vancouver, if you go back to, I think it was 1972 or 73, the Barnett government in BC adopted an agricultural reserve, basically an urban growth boundary around the urbanization. At that point, that is to say, the 1971 census showed that the median multiple in the Vancouver metropolitan area was about 3.9. That is, the median price of the median house price was about 3.9 times that of the median household income. Now it is 11.8. Well, needless to say, that kind of an increase creates just a terrible problem for people looking for housing. We rate markets that have a median multiple of 9 or above, we rate those as impossibly unaffordable. And the reason we use that term is because if you look at an income distribution and you look at the amount of a down payment that you've got to come up with to qualify for for a mortgage on the median priced house, it's largely unaffordable to any household that is not in the 20%. Whereas if you go back to 1971, the median house was affordable to the median household income family, or I should say household. And so that's basically the problem. And what happens is, in the case of Vancouver, it's Metro Vancouver. It's not the city of Vancouver or the city of Burnaby. In the case of Montreal, there's also an agricultural limit that does the same thing. In Ontario, you have a an urban growth boundary. They call it, and there's a slide that shows you what's happened to housing affordability since the first year of data we've got, or since 2005, which was our first reporting. You see, even Vancouver has risen almost, well, it's certainly doubled over that period of time. So essentially, the cost of living in a place like Vancouver or Toronto is far above the rest of the country, and it's largely because of housing affordability, which drives the standard of living.
Okay, so to be very clear here, Wendell, if we can, we've done this to ourselves. This
Absolutely.
is a housing crisis. This is a train wreck, and the proof of the data is right in front of us. And so what is a median multiple here? Explain this in plain language. What is
the
that?
Median multiple is the median house price divided by the median household income. So it basically, your house, if it were affordable, would be 3 times incomes or 3 years of income. Now, nobody pays, I mean, unless you're paying cash. It's just a ratio between the two. But I mean, the cost of living in Vancouver and Toronto has become terrible. And as the video said quite rightly, what has happened is people are moving out of areas like the Vancouver CMA, Census Metropolitan Area, and the Toronto CMA to places like Waterloo in Ontario, and Chilliwack, and Vancouver Island, and the basic problem is that the major metropolitan areas in the last 5 years have lost about 270,000 domestic migrants. That is to say, about 270,000 people have left Toronto and Ottawa-Gatineau, and Edmonton and Calgary, though they've actually done pretty well, and Montreal. And that's a real problem because most people cannot get into a house at this point. So that's the real problem. And what's happening is people are actually going out of their way to solve this problem all by themselves, and they're moving out of the Census Metropolitan Area to smaller communities. A lot of the, or I should say, some of the urban areas or the markets in especially New Brunswick and Nova Scotia are doing better, and people are just taking things into their own hands. So again, there was a lot of discussion in the election about cities and zoning. Well, in fact, cities have very little control over this. In virtually every one of the metropolitan areas that I mentioned, the zoning, the problem is zoning on the periphery. It is metropolitan area zoning. The city of Toronto can't do anything about it. The city of Vancouver can't do anything about it. In Vancouver, it's Metro Vancouver. So again, these are tough times. And
okay, but what? So there's no solution, Wendell. What's the solution to this problem?
Well, the solution is to redo the land use regulations. It's a tough solution. Quite frankly, however, because we've been working on this problem now for 20 years, 21 years, I have faith, quite frankly, that the people that really need to have better housing affordability are going to be moving other places. And I mean, you see it in the net migration, the internal migration data that Stats Canada puts out. This slide right here. You see the Census Metropolitan Areas, about 273,000 loss. I can't see the other, unfortunately, on my screen at this point, but the census agglomerations, which are communities ranging from 10,000 people in the core to 100,000, they're gaining a bit. But believe it or not, the fastest growing areas in terms of people moving are outside the census metropolitan areas and outside the census agglomeration. They are going to very small places because in those places, housing is much more affordable.
Okay, so the bottom line is that in major markets, and the information's here, it's consistent with this annual report going over, as you said, Wendell, 21 years. Congratulations for your heroic research trying to document this around the world, because you look at some 95 markets, as I recall. it's fascinating data, but it doesn't reveal, I would say, turning to you, Marco, the impact that unaffordable housing has on people's lives. So, how would you frankly say or answer the question, why does this issue matter to Canadians?
Well, housing is vital, of course, and we've seen sort of the growth of numbers in Canada of people not only not being able to afford housing, but people living on the streets, right? The homelessness, and so they're not directly connected, but they're not divorced. The point is, people need places to live. The reason why this index is particularly important and interesting to the average person is that it calculates the affordability of homes on the basis of the median income. And
Mm,
so the median income is sort of, that income that is calculated on the basis of the lowest and the highest. And so it portrays, in some statistical sense, the income of the average, not quite the average, uh, middle class person. And
mhm,
so we live in a liberal democracy, and liberal democracies are sustained by the welfare of the middle class. This is
mhm,
going back, a couple of thousand years, all the way to Aristotle, um, where Aristotle sort of laid out this idea that we still believe and we still work on, that the stability of a polity is based on the stability of the middle class. And
mhm,
so, if we cannot support as states and societies a middle class that can reasonably afford places to live, and places to live is the main one. You were pointing out just earlier that 51% of Canadians are struggling to pay the mortgage. That
mhm,
means that people are therefore using some of their income, or a good deal of their income, to pay for other things, or taking away from paying other things, such as groceries and all the other things that are vital to enjoying life as we know it in a sort of
mhm.
a modern society. So this is crucial because it has welfare implications, it has health implications, and importantly, also it has political implications.
Okay, I think that's very well said, Marco and Wendell. So the bottom line is that housing affordability matters so much so that, again, I underline this as a foundational policy file in the sense that this has a domino effect on every aspect of our life. You need a place to live. And if you don't have an affordable place to live, why would you create a family? Why would you have any vision for growing up, becoming an adult? And I don't mean to denigrate anybody who's renting, of course not. But you need to have good housing so people form a family, that they are having confidence of building a future for them and their families. I mean, this is just a key relationship, is it not, Wendell?
No, exactly, exactly. And one of the things I think people should be aware of is that the solutions that the urban planning community are putting forward are just not very effective. The idea of densifying neighborhoods, and this is
Yes.
happening all over the place.
Mhm.
Um, the fact is that the research shows that the problem in housing affordability is the cost of land, not the cost of housing. You don't
Ah.
improve housing affordability by building more houses. You improve housing affordability by building houses on inexpensive land. That
Mhm.
means the land at the edge of town. Yet all of these programs that you have, in the metropolitan areas we've been talking about, basically have drawn lines around the city. It said you can't
Okay.
build out there.
Okay, so
And
just hold there for a sec.
yep,
There's a comment from Tracy Smith, and honestly, I'm going to cut to the case, the chase here. She
right.
says, Tracy Smith says, "Of course, and what's happening is not incompetence; it's by design."
Oh, no
Now,
question about it.
it's by design, but surely people don't connect the dots here, and I don't mean to vilify anybody here. Seriously, is that this kind of pack 'em and stack 'em kind of approach to urban design, right? Like I am around a neighborhood now where they're trying to propose 60-story towers for condominiums. That's their solution. It's very expensive. And I would ask the question, who wants to live in a condominium up on the 60th floor? Hey, if you want to do it, hey, go for it. But a lot of people actually want a shred of grass to walk their dog on and raise a family. And so I look at this and I think, wow, Canada is, the last time I checked, the second largest nation in the world. We have a fair amount of land, in other words. And yet you're saying, Wendell, when you build a house, it's not the price of the house so much, it's the price of the land. And they've created these
That's right.
kind of artificial bubbles where the price is sky high. Like in Abbotsford, BC, it costs over $5.5 million the last time I checked for 1 acre of industrial land. So who in their right mind is going to order, put their business there? So the question is it incompetence, if I understand the question here? Or is it by design?
Oh, it's definitely by design.
Decimate the middle class.
Yes, it's definitely by design. And the urban planning literature wants denser cities. It wants cities that meet various design standards. The basic point, as far as I'm concerned, is that the bottom line is whether or not housing is affordable to the middle class, as Marco indicated. That's all that matters. I mean, you go out to UBC, University of British Columbia in Vancouver. One of their leading housing analysts, Patrick Condon, has basically looked closely for years. Patrick, and I used to talk to Patrick 20 years ago. Patrick basically was among the other planners in the area, a great advocate of density, higher density. But he's come to the point now of recognizing that density does not solve the problem. As a matter of fact, no major central city in the world, in the first world, has increased its population density like Vancouver. If you go back to 1950, the city of Vancouver had about 40 square miles. Today, it has the same 40 square miles, but it has about 70% more people. But the prices in the Vancouver area are triple what they were 50 years ago. So it's a real problem, and we need to have housing policy that is evaluated and judged based upon the good that it provides for citizens in terms of meeting their needs, not the good that it provides for architects and planners.
Right on. So we're shoving people into poverty,
Right.
and it's by design.
That's
And
right.
we are not delivering affordable housing in many of our markets. Now, there are many markets in Canada that are affordable, and thank you for that. But I want to just be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. Marco, why, like, surely we should be building up, we should be packing and stacking them in dense columns because we don't have any agricultural land. We need to preserve every square inch of land for the sake of the environment and for preserving. Look, I see this all the time at universities. They all talk about food security programs.
Right.
We've all seen this. And it's like, we don't have any land for agriculture. And so, I mean, can you respond to that argument? Because I hear that all the time. We have to preserve every square field, and heaven forbid we think about the people that need to live.
Well, I suppose that's true in very, very specific spots in Canada.
Sure.
But I sit in Calgary. Between Alberta and Saskatchewan, we have 3/4 of the arable land in the country. So that means there is land galore. And as was pointed out, second largest country in the world, 10 million square kilometers. There are no land issues, but for a very specific spots. But the reality is we have convinced ourselves that we need to pack him and stack him, as you were saying. And this is not new. I was pointing out to Wendell that I went to look at some of the older iterations of these studies. And I wanted to look at 2015 for a specific reason. I'll let you figure out what that is. And right here in one of the places, I found this very interesting formulation: a wholly contrived crisis. This is from 2015. In other words, what I'd like to point out, and I'm sure Wendell will not disagree, that this is not the first time people are talking about this being a man-made crisis of sorts, right? That this is self-inflicted. And so, never mind 20 years ago, but 10 years ago, people were saying this. Wendell was saying this, and people around Wendell were saying this, and not much seems to have changed. In fact, in some places, it's gotten worse. In Calgary, for example, where I live, uh, there aren't quite the prohibitions or restrictions to build outside the city limits, which has contributed to the enormous growth of some of the outlying communities, like Okotoks and Airdrie and what have you. So it's a big growth there. But you think that the fact that lots of people, as Wendell was pointing out, uh, middle class and sensible people are trying to get out of this circle of restrictions outside, these urban cores, and that would somehow motivate city planners and decision makers to at least put the brakes on what they're doing or reverse them. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Um, the guy who's now running the official opposition in Alberta was the mayor of Calgary for 11 years. He was notorious for just wanting to restrict people and essentially force them to live in this sort of stacked and packed places. It is no surprise, for example, that one of the most popular um, shopping destinations just north of Calgary is this place called the Cross Iron Mill shopping center. Right? Is first of all, it's gigantic, and second, they built it. The developers built it right outside the city limits of Calgary for a reason. So it's a big, to be polite, thumbing of the nose to the former mayor of Calgary. But all that money, all that investment, all those taxes that those people are paying in those shops are going to different places than in Calgary. And this is happening across the board in places where this is possible. Anyway, I don't want to rant on. The
No.
question the question was more specific than that. But the issue is these restrictions, essentially, in a place where there is so much land, make absolutely no sense.
Yeah, I'm
Right on.
sorry that I didn't that I wasn't prepared for this, but I can tell you that across Canada, because I have looked at this issue, across Canada, you go back to 1950, and you're going to find that a lot more agricultural land was in production, okay, at that time than now. Now, that's not because you didn't need the land. I mean, it's not because urbanization wiped out everything. The urbanization of Canada is very small part. It is because we and you in Canada have become far better in terms of your agricultural productivity. You don't need the agricultural land you used to have. And it is
Interesting. So just to clarify,
me,
Wendell, we don't want to miss the headline here. You're saying in 1950, and man, you're one of the leading urban geographers in the world. You're saying there was more land in agricultural production in 1950 than there was today.
Yes. Now, the problem is I'm going from memory, and it may be that it was 1960, but I'll send you a note giving you the data, and you may want to, in your next program, you may want to look at it. But no, this is one of the amazing things. I remember one time, I've got a good friend at the Paris University that I used to be at, who was a geographer, who was shocked that anybody is talking about food security. I mean, you go around the world, you go to the European Union, you go to Canada, you go to Australia, you go to the United States, and you are going to find that if you go back a few decades, a whole lot more land was in agricultural production. In the United States, for example, as much land as I think it's Texas plus Washington has been taken out of agricultural production, and it has not gone into cities. Cities aren't that big. So that's something that,
So I am talking with my two special guests here, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie and, of course, senior fellow Wendell Cox, about the issue of housing affordability. And we just released this report this past week. I encourage you to look at that report on the Frontier website. but this is a foundational issue for this country. And I want to come back to this, and I really appreciate all the comments that are coming in across the country. Please like this conversation, share it if you think it's important. I look at this and I think that if we can't get our heads wrapped around this issue, we're in deep trouble, because you aren't going to have people. This is the Canadian dream. Like, think of it. I know that when I reflect on my first house, I got it quite early and paid for it, and it was twice my income. And it was a great house. It had 4 bedrooms and all the rest. It was a very great thing. I mean, it was so exciting to feel like you could build a future and go forward in life. And I just think this is just demoralizing. Now, the good news is that in Canada, there are markets that have the land available. People, the private sector is building the houses, which is very exciting. And so, can you tell us quickly, Wendell, about those markets that are affordable? I mean, you know this landscape backwards and forward, but that's a good news story, is it not?
Yeah, well, you'll usually find that the smaller markets are more affordable, and you can get down to under a median multiple of 3, and for example, people have a lot more tolerance for commuting at this point, because so many people are able to work less than 5 days a week. Maybe they work Tuesday through Thursday or whatever. So that's an important thing too. So there's no question that you have answers in Canada, and they are going to they are capable of handling new housing without changing anything at this point. And in the long run, maybe as the slowdown in urban growth is identified by the leaders of cities, they'll begin to open up. But the basic point is, in urban policy, in urban planning, and in housing production, we must be evaluating our success based upon how many people own their own homes. And unfortunately, around the world at this point, and by the way, I hate to tell you, the US and Canada are the best nations in the world for housing affordability at this point. Part of that has to do with our federal structure. In Canada, of course, you have a federal structure that in many ways looks similar to ours. And so you have some provinces where they're a little bit more liberal on housing development than others. So there's a lot of hope. But at the same time, we do need to work on trying to improve the zoning in these cities and in these metropolitan areas. In Toronto, for example, the GTA, the urban growth boundary is basically under the control of the province. So, the cities themselves don't have that much control.
Okay. So to be really simple, though, where would you move specifically if you had to find an affordable house in Canada, Wendell? Where would you go?
My sense is I'd be moving north of Calgary, maybe to Airdrie, maybe a bit further north than that. You're going to find, I think you're going to find that kind of thing there.
Would you move to Winnipeg? Would you go to Winnipeg?
Yeah. I mean, granted, I'd want to make sure I have heat in the wintertime, but
yeah. No, but the key is, if you've got a job, there's no mystery why people wouldn't move to Winnipeg. Now, it's got higher taxes, right? There's always different decisions to be made here, right?
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you can get a nice home in Winnipeg still. It's still, I mean, its prices are going up. There's other places like in Eastern Canada, right? St. John. Now, those are all changing. We see that. So there are solutions. But if you want to go to Toronto, forget it. Montreal, forget it. And I want to tell you, I was involved in the redevelopment of a long-term care facility in Vancouver. And would you believe that was a redevelopment of an existing facility? It's still not completed. It is a nightmare to get a building permit. In fact, Canada, OECD figures came out. Canada's ranked at the bottom of turnaround for building permits. I think the only country that is slower than us is Slovakia. I mean, it's just totally insane. Like bottom 37, right? So then we have a situation where you really can't recruit staff, even though you pay them fairly well. No one is going to want to commute and spend 3 to 4 hours on the road. I mean, that's poverty, right? And I think it goes back to the famous urban geographer that Alain Berthaud, who we know, who talks about if you don't understand as a city planner how cities are supposed to work, you've got to make the commute time a half an hour or less.
Right.
So we got
Right.
the we've got the worst of both worlds. We've got unaffordable housing in some markets, and they don't want to build highways. In fact, they're building bicycle lanes to shunt all the traffic together and shut down the movement of the car, the automobile,
Yeah.
all because they think that bicycle lanes are the solution in a cold winter called Canada. And meanwhile, like, so then you're kind of undermining the ability of our cities to function economically in a productive way. Am I sounding too simplistic here? Do you want to take a crack at that one, Wendell?
Well, no, but you've got there's no question about the fact that we're not building the housing that people want. And things like you suggest, expecting people to ride bicycles. I mean, yeah, that's fine. There are people that can do that. But the fact is that if you're going to drop a kid off at daycare, if you're going to be a very long trip, I know that there are days that it rains, or in Vancouver, for example, and it even snows in Calgary. If you haven't been there, you know, you might, and there are days when it's too cold to ride the bicycle to work in Edmonton. So, I mean, this is just ideology. And we need to focus our housing policy on the practicality of serving the needs and desires of people.
Got it.
Yeah.
I like that. What do you think, Marco? What do you think about those bicycle lanes? And by the way, I do like bicycling, so no
Yeah.
offense to them. But
So do I. I have a lovely bicycle, and we live on the edge of Fish Creek Park, and we go out bicycling and whatnot. But I don't want to be caught going to a meeting downtown in February on my bicycle, right? Who would be insane enough, mind you? I shouldn't say that. I've seen a couple of people on bicycles in February, but they're probably training for a triathlon or something like that. It's really not. It's really not the most popular activity around. I want to pick up on something that Wendell said about, and you said about the number of hours that people spend on the road, right? It has decreased because of course, the ability of people to work remotely, but this is one of the issues of productivity, or it has an impact on productivity. If you have to spend 2 hours, 3 hours going into work and then heading home, you're talking about 4, 6 hours where people are sitting in a vehicle. And there's a lot more things that you can do in a vehicle today with a whole bunch of tools. But the reality is it suppresses the productivity of people. In Canada, that is a humongous problem because our productivity keeps dropping like lead in the last few years. And so this made me think that compounded to the problem that Wendell is outlining here, which is the problem of land use. In Canada, we have other problems that act as sort of worsening layers to the problem. When we have a problem of productivity, people are making less money on the average. And so that means that while the cost of housing keeps going up, the value and the ability to pay and buy keeps going down because our productivity keeps going down. So that worsens the problem. Another thing that worsens the problem, and I know people like to talk about this, and it's important to mention it because it is not the sole driver. I mean, these things are complex. We had an open border policy up until recently. And people say,
What did you say, Marco?
people were just allowed to come in whenever they felt like it. And this is not just our problem. Of course, our southern cousins had the same problem as well. But this is not necessarily the single cause of housing affordability, and of course the lack of housing, which in Canada is also a problem. But it is another layer on top of it, and of course, we have seen recently the government announce that they are going to curtail the stratospheric number of foreign students coming into the country, which normally that is a good thing, but in certain markets, for example, especially in markets where people cannot afford the premium housing, is housing that normally goes to students or people with sort of lesser means and lower pay, and all these foreign students are also vying for those places, making the problem even bigger. So productivity, the essentially nearly unlimited influx of people, and of course the excuse me, this business of open borders makes the problem in Canada even worse.
I think you're very right, Marco, is that our immigration policy seems like, well, a classic case where the federal government is letting in record millions of immigrants into this country. And I mean, what a callous, unthoughtful approach to policy, because these poor people come, where are they going to live? And let
Yeah.
alone displacing, Canadians. I mean, it's just truly a circus. So on that file, though, you mentioned productivity, Marco, and I think that's very well said. And I would say there's all kinds of analysis, report after report I can show you, where these commuting times impact people's health, their ability to be part of their family, let alone volunteer in the community. And this is just making people's lives miserable. And so my question is, you mentioned, Wendell, that part of this, in fact, Marco, you did too, that part of what's driving this is kind of an ideological perspective. I want both of you to quickly say, what do you mean by that? And secondly, does this also reflect an attitude, a lack of caring for people? When you institute policies like this in plain sight, and I see the homeless camps by the thousands across this country, and I know there's other complicated issues like addictions and stuff like that, but this is atrocious. When you're putting that much pain, you're inflicting people, you're driving them into poverty. Do our decision makers, what's going on here? Are they in a bubble that they don't see this reality? Because I see all kinds of plans being announced and people scrambling around saying, well, the government needs to start building houses, we need to do this and that. And they're not even close to delivering the supply of housing that's needed to rebalance the situation and give hope to people. So what's the ideology? And is this again deliberate by our decision makers? What do you think, Wendell?
Let me suggest. These kinds of regulations have been with us for 50 years in Vancouver and about 20 years in Toronto. What were these people thinking? The people that are in the urban planning departments in these cities, what were they thinking? Did they not notice? I mean, if you go back 10 or 15 years, you're not going to find nearly the concern expressed across Canada about housing affordability. It hadn't gotten nearly as bad.
Right.
Now, the fact that nobody noticed, the fact that the planners who have the responsibility to ensure that housing is there for people to live in didn't lead this program to try to get this under control suggests some very bad things. I don't know if it's that they don't care or whatever, but the fact is, when you talk about kids that are growing up in vans, the research is showing that housing is very important to the adjustment and the raising of children. It's just something that government has failed like you cannot believe here. And by the way, I'm not faulting Canada. If we were talking about Australia, I'd be calling Canada better,
Or Scotland.
Yeah. So
Anywhere.
So again, yeah.
So it's a philosophy that thinks
Oh, yeah.
that government is going to solve everybody's problems. And meanwhile, they don't understand their own limitations. Is that what we're getting at, Marco?
Well, I'm not sure. No. I mean, the urban planning community has for more than 100 years had almost a vendetta against suburbs. Now, a suburb is essentially like, believe it or not, Burnaby with its 70-story apartment buildings is a suburb. But the urban planners have been given power, and they have their visions. And if their vision of the city is not being met, they're not going to do anything about it. And that's not, I don't have to cite Vancouver and Toronto. I can talk about Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, Miami. So I mean, it is really a miscarriage of public policy. It is public policy malpractice. What has been going on in each of these metropolitan areas where this kind of housing affordability problem has arisen.
So there you have it. There's another crime in this country. We're announcing it by Wendell Cox. Policy malpractice.
You bet.
You've heard it here today. That's a historic moment. So what are you thinking, Marco?
I think Wendell is absolutely right. When we look at the history of urban planning, this is not a new problem. It has been, and it is a kind of an ideology of its own, right? But it has been compounded severely by environmental concerns, and they are concerns that I want to make sure people understand that just because one drives a car doesn't mean that one doesn't care about the environment. So there are gradations in this area, and I live in Alberta, where it's an oil-producing province. There are millions and millions and millions of people who come to Alberta to enjoy the natural environment. You know why? Because Albertans care for the environment, including people who are in the oil business, by the way. That may be a surprise to half of the Laurentian, our Laurentian cousins. But here's the deal. The ideology that is gripping the throat of environmental planners and related bureaucrats isn't just a concern for the environment. It goes further than that in essentially placing the environment at a greater plane and at the expense of human welfare. And so it's, I think the word is ecocentric. So the environment is at the center of everything they do. Whereas in the old days, dare I say, that people had public policy and wanted to implement good public policy for the sake and the welfare of human beings. And now we care more about squirrels and bugs. Not that one shouldn't care about squirrels, but on the scale of importance, we have now placed environmental issues and the ecosystem as the center of just about everything that public policy drives. And this is part of the problem. So why do we keep going and doing these things at the expense of people and making them poorer, et cetera, et cetera? I think this sort of ecocentric environmental ideology is compounding and driving the problem and making it worse.
I think that's very well said, Marco. It's almost like we've got another kind of secular religion, and we're prepared to bow down to that edict or orthodoxy. And damn the torpedoes, we're willing to destroy the lives of our cities and the lives of our citizens. So that we can be faithful to that orthodoxy.
The two ideologies are sort of overlap. One can be an environmental, one can be an urban planner and not really care about the environment, but they are prepared to use the ideology and those beliefs to push the politicians into doing what they are planning or implementing as public policy. And so it becomes both, in some respects, the excuse as well as the motivation.
Okay, so we're sorry, Wendell. One
of the things that you find out about urban planning is that the urban planners are very concerned about equality. Yet there is no greater source of inequality in the cities of Canada than housing. And really, and this is something that we need to be concerned about.
I think that's so well said, Wendell. We're really creating a lot of poverty here by bad public policy.
Question. Well, by the way,
and if we can't, sorry, Wendell.
I should also tell you, in the United States, our mainstream media all loves the idea of of densification and so on. And recently, a reporter who has been a real advocate of densification, a guy by the name of Connor Doherty with the New York Times, ran an article in their Sunday magazine that indicated that, in fact, if we were going to solve the housing affordability problem in the United States, we needed to sprawl more. And as I told a convention in Calgary just 3 or 4 weeks ago, if it comes down to a question of poverty versus sprawl, count me on the side of sprawl.
Well said. I want to shift here a little bit. I'm going to come back to housing solutions in a moment, and I want to do this in a particular way. I want to reflect on this Tuesday's Thrown from the Speech in Ottawa, because this is one of the themes, and I think they're interrelated. And I want to turn to, what's his name again? King Charles here, and his bride,
You forgot his
Camilla. So King Charles III, to be precise. And there were some themes mentioned here. And I think we even have a clip here of Charles speaking about some themes.
The government is guided by its conviction that the economy is only truly strong when it serves everyone. Many Canadians are struggling to get ahead. The government is responding, reducing middle-class taxes and saving two-income families up to $840 a year. It will cut the GST on homes at or under $1 million for first-time home buyers, delivering savings of up to $50,000. And it will lower the GST on homes between $1 million and $1.5 million.
Well, so there you have it. That's part of the speech from the throne, and you've got some key themes there. It's interesting that a number of these themes were almost mimics of another party's platform, but we want this government to succeed. Canada is in deep trouble economically and otherwise. And it's interesting, this other clip here related to some of those policy themes.
Sarcasm in Europe? I'm not sure. Am I reading that right, Rachel? Or where are you going?
Oh, you know, my up today is that the throne speech, the Liberals have decided to outline the 5 major priorities of the Conservative platform as their throne speech. And David, I'm just going to read you a few of them. Cost of living, getting homes built, unleashing businesses, public safety, immigration. Every single one of those Conservative priorities came up as major aspects of the throne speech. And so I was pleasantly surprised listening to the King, talk about how they are going to contain immigration, how they are going to build more homes. Those are all things that the Conservatives have been putting forward now for years and years and years. And finally, we are seeing under this Liberal government those priorities. What we do want to see, and something that's been talked about a lot today, is what are the actual plans to make those priorities happen, and what will Mark Carney be doing in order to propel them forward?
So it's interesting, in the Parliament, it's the 44th one, and as I recall, it's been 5.5 months since the Parliament has met, which is unusual in this country. But we have 112 new rookie MPs of the 343 members, and one of those new members is none other than the former mayor of Vancouver, Gregor Robertson. And there's a clip here about his concerns regarding housing. He becomes the new federal minister of housing.
Affordable housing, delivering that. Need to go down. No, I think that we need to deliver more supply, make sure the market is stable. It's a huge part of our economy. We need to be delivering more affordable housing. The government of Canada has not been building affordable housing since the 90s, and we've created a huge shortage across Canada. That's where the big need is right now, and I'm very encouraged that the Prime Minister and our commitment right now in government is the double construction and focus on the affordable side.
So there you've got a lot of clips. There's some encouraging messages from the speech from the throne. It's obviously more of a vague document, as the tradition is, in terms of the Majesty represents on behalf, as the head of state, articulates the themes. Marco, are you optimistic that we're going to get our economy moving here, let alone working at housing with this speech from the throne? Or are there any clues there that give you hope?
I always have hope, but my hope is not in the politicians, because hope, of course, is a theological virtue and not a political one.
Okay.
Um, but that said, they're saying the right things, so one has to commend them for that. For years and years, they couldn't see the problem. They wouldn't see the problem. They refused to speak about the problem until perhaps in the latter days of the Trudeau government, they began to talk about removing the shackling policies that was driving the price of land upwards and so forth. So the fact that they borrowed these ideas from another party is neither here nor there if they are actually going to go and do the right thing. The part where I am less hopeful is where the same people who for 9.5 years did very little or nothing about the problem are suddenly talking about solving the problem. And so I'm not terribly optimistic about that. Let me give you another quick example, because a lot of this is rhetoric, I suspect. The prime minister the current prime minister, during the time where he was campaigning, he said that he was going to have all interprovincial barriers to trade removed by July the 1st. That, ladies and gentlemen, is just over a month away. And he said this about 2 months ago. So basically, 90 days. But I am not optimistic that in more than 150 years, this has not been done. And now it is being promised that is going to happen in the next 30 days. So color me skeptical, maybe even cynical, but I don't believe that this is going to happen. One more point. The former mayor of Vancouver, who was largely part and parcel driving this problem in some respects, is now the guy in charge of solving it. Wendell will jump in here, and I want to prompt him because he keeps talking about housing, affordable housing, which is not the same thing as housing affordability. So I'm going to throw that one to Wendell because I know that he's very good at outlining the difference.
Yeah, when we say affordable housing, I hate to tell you, we mean subsidized housing, not market rate housing. That's a big deal. And in fact, I was very pleased at the Calgary conference a few weeks ago, where that is very much understood. The fact is, and the Minister Robertson, and I only know what I heard him say. I don't know anything about what his policies are, but he seemed very interested in Canada building affordable housing. Canada does not need more subsidized housing. It needs housing that can be afforded by good middle-class families that have enough money to pay for it. So I mean, this is a tough problem, and it would be a mistake. And I'm not going to prejudge the Carney government on this, but it would be a mistake to presume that affordable housing is the answer. It is not. No country can afford to subsidize a huge part of its populace with housing subsidies. Hopefully, their program will be more comprehensive than I'm perceiving it to be.
So you're not suggesting that the Soviet model of housing was a success? Is that what you're saying?
No. Or even the Chinese.
No. Well said. No, but sincerely, we've got to open up. We've got a free willy, and that is land.
That's right.
And we need to get rid of the red tape that bogs down the private sector, because developer after developer, who in their right mind would buy land and sit on it for 10 to 30 years with the expectation, like, who can do that? So you're punting out the little guy who wants to build houses,
Well,
12 or 14 of them a year. And they can't survive.
Yeah, what concerned me about the clip was that it reflects a lot of the arguments that are going on in the United States. We hear the people that have gotten us in trouble in the United States with the same kinds of policies, talking about we've got to build more affordable housing, and that's subsidized housing. And they say, oh yeah, we got to build more houses and we got to build affordable houses. What we never hear is what it's going to cost. And the basic problem is if we go to Portland or Seattle or Vancouver or Toronto, a builder cannot build a house inside the urban growth boundary that he or she can make a profit on. It's commercially infeasible. And the urban planning, departments and ministries around the world need to start recognizing reality and making housing that is affordable by reducing the regulations that have made it so unaffordable.
Right on. So as we kind of wrap up our far-reaching discussion here today, and it's been an excellent discussion, and the audience is just, I'm so impressed by the comments. This is a reminder from Tracy. You will own nothing and be happy. We know that as a reference to some globalists out there, maybe Klaus Schwab, as I recall. But sincerely, like, this is really quite demotivating for citizens. I mean, I hear this all the time. I was just at a grocery store yesterday, and a lady with some little kids was just expressing frustration to me that it's really hard to know how you're going to make choices when your budget is that tight. And it's the affordability thing. And the whole idea is that, what hope is there for people to thrive and move forward in their lives? I mean, my heart really goes out to people. So in this context, let's talk a little bit about solutions. And I want to go about this in a particular way. Because this report, Wendell, that you're the lead on so brilliantly, looks at international markets. And I remember, I'm trying to remember, it was the other fall, we met with an interesting delegation from Singapore.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
This report, it's very interesting. When this report hits the public side, it's very prominent in many different countries. In Canada, it's hard to get the profile. It's almost like the legacy media doesn't really want to talk about it. They'll talk about housing affordability in general terms, but not really the hard issues and solutions. And that's just my opinion. But if you look at Singapore, this is a very successful, one of the highest standard of livings in the world. They are a real, in many respects, leader in terms of so many issues. And so they look at housing, and their housing is far more affordable than any of the major markets in this country. And yet they've got a whole thing, and they partner up brilliantly with the private sector. Shouldn't we be learning from those international examples where you have Vancouver at basically at 13 in terms of this measurement of housing affordability versus what is Hong Kong now, Wendell?
I think 14.4. I think
14.4. That is the number. And this is incredible how, look, Vancouver's a wonderful place, but it's a few million people. It's hardly like the same scale.
Did you mean to ask were you meaning to talk about Singapore or Hong Kong?
Okay. In this case, I want to focus in on Singapore, let alone Hong Kong, and say, what do we learn from those international locations?
Okay, Singapore has a median multiple of 4. It's one of the best in our survey. And what you have in Singapore is a situation where when they achieved their independence from Malaysia back in, I think, 63 or 64, their then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew basically decided that housing affordable was very important to building wealth and everything. And they had a terrible housing situation. They were third world. At this point, Singapore's average, I should say, median household income is a good 30 or 40% above that of the United States, and even more above the Canadian number. So what he did, because you see, Singapore is an area that hardly takes up as much space as the Vancouver urban area. I mean, it's got 6 million people in only about 600 square kilometers. Okay. And they knew that they couldn't just open the market up and let anybody come in and do what they want, because they'd be out of land too far. That's the difference between Singapore and Vancouver and Toronto. You don't have a land problem in those places. But what they did is they set up a thing where basically they would make, how should I put it? They created, because the density is so high, they created apartment buildings. Now some of them 30 or 40 stories high. And you go and you buy those. These people buy these homes. They can sell the homes. They're built by the private sector. They go through a competitive process to have them built. And you know, a lot of Singaporeans complain that the housing is boring because so much of it's the same. But, you know, there are only really two places in the world like Singapore. One is Singapore and one is Hong Kong. When you only have so much land, there's not much you can do. But it is amazing what they have done. And they are a real they are a real lighthouse for the industry in terms of what they do. At the same time, one would need to be careful. The last thing I would recommend would be to make the housing market in Singapore or Toronto like it is in Singapore, because you have plenty of land. You don't have those problems.
Yeah. So Roger, it's interesting, from the audience asks a very direct question. I think it's a very good one. Singapore is a city state. Explain to me how they don't have a land problem. That's an interesting question.
Well, what they do, they build up.
They build up.
It's an island, and it's about 600 square kilometers. I think at 600 square kilometers, it is about the same land area as the city of Toronto, the expanded city of Toronto.
Right. But to be clear, Singapore has got a much more difficult situation than Canada because they don't have much land.
That's right.
Yet they are working as a team to empower the private sector, empower buyers, and they're delivering affordable housing.
Yeah,
they're driving toward the result, not some screwball process where you're introducing all kinds of red tape and bicycle lanes and slowing it down and delivering a product that's not anywhere near affordable.
Yeah, government should be delivering, should make it possible for the private sector to deliver housing that is affordable. I can tell you, I've had many meetings with the Singaporean officials. When I talk to Singaporean public officials, I am talking to people that care about public service, that care about improving the lives of their people. I mean, Singapore is really a well-governed geography, and they've been very successful.
So let's learn from those international examples. And so I want to wrap up our discussion by asking a question, Marco and Wendell, and that has to do with when we've got this kind of challenges of housing affordability, how does it impact our culture? I mean, Marco, you eloquently led off by this is like issues related to what the ancient Greeks and Athens talked about, the great Minos, the importance of having a vibrant middle class so they can not be dependent on the state as the poor or be overly driven by narrow agenda as the rich, but on track with trying to build our country. So how does this impact our culture? Any thoughts on that, Marco?
Yeah, in fact, the culture is the solution. Let me explain. We live in what we normally define as a liberal democratic society. And that means that individuals have a certain primacy in the culture and in a bunch of rights. And that one of the values of the culture is this hokey idea of liberty. And this idea of liberty is what has led us to free markets. The again, hokey notion that people can make their own decisions and can make decisions for themselves to figure out what is best for them whenever and in whatever situation. And so at the very core, what Wendell has outlined here is, in sort of economic terms, not that I'm an economist, is that there is a serious interference, with the workings of the market by all these restrictions, namely the restriction of the land.
Yeah.
And so that the principal solution, or one of the principal solutions, Wendell just pointed out, for example, that in Singapore, the private sector has been a tremendous part of the solution. So what we have is people who have created the problem or made it worse, trying to fix it by using the same principles of interfering with the market that created the problem to begin with. And so what we need is already in the culture, which is, again, the idea of liberal democratic societies, letting people make their own decisions and letting the market drive towards better solutions.
And well said. And in that context, Marco and Wendell, I think it underlines the importance of property rights as being critical for the exercise of that freedom and the ability to be innovative and work together as community. What's your final comment, Wendell?
Well, one thing, I just wanted to go back quickly to Singapore to make sure it's understood. Singapore has a housing affordability, a home ownership rate of about 90%. Most 90%. Of that, 90. Now in Canada, it's about 65, 70. In the States, it's about 65. And that is because of this program, this Housing Development Board program, whose mission it is to improve housing affordability throughout Singapore. So it's one of the highest numbers in the world.
It's remarkable. Well, let's get on a plane and go to Singapore.
I'm happy to go to Singapore, but again, it's not the answer for Vancouver, but or Toronto. But what it does show is that when bureaucrats are rightly inclined, even in an area where you would think it's impossible, they can make it work. And, Singapore doesn't tell me what Vancouver or Toronto should do in the long run, but they need to do something because it is clear that their governments are not providing for them the way they should.
Right on. Well, this has been an incredible conversation, Wendell, Marco, and to the audience. Thank you so much for all your thoughtful comments and questions. This has been real. We try to make policy not just a quote academic exercise or ethereal, because we know that this issue matters to you as Canadians. And so I want to thank you so much, Wendell and Marco, for joining our conversation today.
Thank you.
So that wraps up our conversation. We are grateful that everybody could be part of this. Please share this conversation with your family, friends. Get the word out, like it. We appreciate your comments again. And be sure to join us next week when we talk about further directions when it comes to the future of this government and where we need to go. So please join us every Thursday for the live edition of Leaders on the Frontier. Be sure to also check us out on Merit TV Canada. You can see us across the country from coast to coast on these cable providers. You can see us. We get literally thousands of comments every month, and we're grateful for each and every one of them. So please join us, whether it's on TV or across social media. And until next Thursday, have a terrific week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.